In trade nudes. Me.
Are you okay, Oliver?
Very different.
I'm just
show.
like, there's so much X'd out. It's like, okay, somebody else has got to be next besides me. And it's me. The Metropolitan Opera struck a deal with one of its onions.
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 All right, yeah, onions.
On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm George Cederquist, joined by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, Weston Williams, and Ashlee Hardgrave. All right, this week in Chalk Talk, the OBS team asks just if, when, and how exactly opera will bounce back post-pandemic. What needs to happen now in order to build back opera better? Plus, 2-minute drill. Hey, the Met actually made an agreement with a union. Snaps.
Shocking.
Matt Cummings.
With a union being the operative word there.
With a union.
More on that later.
You got to really hit that article.
Matt Cummings very worried on his Olympics watch.
There are some dark clouds gathering, George. I hate to say it. There were some demonstrations today in Japan over going forward, or rather not going forward, with the 2020 Olympics and 2021. Conditions there are worsening. A recent survey showed that 80% of respondents think that they should not have the Olympics this year. Those protests were supposed to be in conjunction with the IOC president Thomas Bach's visit, but that visit was canceled. Also not a great sign.
Also, no relation to J.S. Bach. Weston Williams, what are you worried about?
I'm worried about nothing. I'm having a good time. I just got a record player. I've been listening to Boris Godunov recorded in Stalinist Russia. Just a delightful time for the whole family. It's a good time.
Who doesn't associate Stalinist Russia with a good time?
a rip-roaring good time.
Oliver Camacho, are you worried about anything?
Well, I'm looking forward to Roland Garros, which will start on time next weekend, May 23rd, I want to say. And so lots of guys in short shorts and white socks, and they get dirty because of that red clay. Love
You
it.
are most definitely not worried. Ashlee, you're presumably worried about the Chicago White Sox.
Oh, honey, I'm not worried. They're the best team in baseball right now. They are at the top of the league. They're at the top of their respective division. Speaking of Chicago baseball, where are the Cubs right now in their
They're
division?
at Clark and Addison, where they've always been.
They're also at the bottom of the statistics, if my memory serves me correctly from checking earlier today, to make sure I made this point on the air with you today.
The Tigers and the Cubs met in interleague play this weekend, a rare NL-AL matchup, which it's torn loyalties in my household over the Detroit Tigres and the Chicago Cubs.
That's what we call a sidestep of being hoisted by your own petard.
Cubs will prevail. Hardgrave, Cubs will prevail, all right?
We'll see about that.
Let's just talk some opera.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
An article in the London Guardian last week argued that the post-pandemic recovery of the arts, including the performing arts and, of course, opera, would likely be slower than anticipated, with many organizations never reviving at all. Quote, recovery is by no means assured, wrote Charlotte Higgins, that article on our website, operaboxscore.com. Let's take a closer look at what a post-pandemic future might be, but we're going to start in the past, look at the present, and then end with the future. Weston Williams set it up for us. What are we looking at historically in terms of pandemic recovery for the arts?
Well, this is kind of a tricky question, obviously, because, obviously, if you look back through history over the hundreds of years opera has been around, you have pandemics popping up all over the place. Just because, we didn't know what to do with them, how to deal with them, so they just kind of became part of life, barring the occasional quarantine of a city and shutting down of houses. For much of opera's history, that was just kind of something you were expected to just bounce back from. That was part of the deal. And we don't really have a sense of what a pandemic will do now. I think the closest actually we can kind of see, the closest impact we can see might be sort of like the state of classical music and opera post World War II, which is always a fascinating subject to me because, you know, you have to think about, you know, the devastation of, you know, theaters being bombed, people who were in the orchestra pit, you know, going off to war and not coming back, and the general zeitgeist afterwards of like, what have we been through? We need to reconsider everything. So before the war, you have big, lush orchestral scores, and then post-war, you've got like Pierre Boulez with like the very sparse, Spartan textures. But you also have a bit of a diverging too after World War II, where you have the new music becomes very sort of dour and hard to listen to. And then the traditionalists take over everywhere else. And you have big companies like, you know, like your Mets and stuff sort of going really leaning into the heavily conservative traditional repertoire. And
Well,
honestly,
these illnesses are different too, right? Like the Spanish flu is very different from COVID.
Right. So World War II might not be the best example for that reason, but looking at the 1917 flu, that's almost an even harder comparison to make, because the Spanish flu worked a lot faster than COVID does. They would have these really, really intense waves. Everything would close down, and then the arts would reopen back up. Here's a wild statistic I found when I was doing sort of researching for this. In the U.S., over the course of the 3-year pandemic or so, arts companies lost about $5 million, which is about $85.5 million today. The Metropolitan Opera alone lost $25 million in revenue as of August 2020. So it's a different scale. It's, even though the flu is a little bit deadlier than COVID, the fact that it was so fast meant that recovery was a little bit better. So even though we're starting to get vaccines, rates are going down, at least in the United States. I think people are also going to be a little bit more conservative with how they want, if they even want to come back. And then, of course, coming back with like partial seating is just not really an option for a lot of these companies.
Well, let's look at the present then. So, Ashlee, how broken, in your opinion, was the opera business in the recent past and in the present?
Pretty damn broken. That was one of the things that kept coming back to me, was that we've spent the better part of the last year sort of shining a light on these, you know, worst kept secrets about all of the problems that were happening in opera. So what this pandemic did was it, you know, took the business, snapped the already broken parts over its knee, and started shining flashlights into all of the fissures. You know, whether it's who's doing the work, who's training, who's getting the jobs, the system it's verkackt, you know, and in some ways I don't want to go back to normal, because that system it did not serve the majority of the people that deserve the access to this art form and who deserve to be celebrated in this art form. So it's, and I think that might be kind of a gloom and doom way to think about it, but that was my first reaction, was business was already broken. Thank goodness we've had this time to really examine it, because if we're going to build back, we got to build back differently.
It's interesting that you say that, Ashlee, because like looking back 100 years, there aren't really any big like cultural touchstones from the Spanish flu in the way that you might expect, given like how traumatic of an event it was. Yeah. And we need to not let that happen again here, because we learned a lot about what kind of inequalities have been bubbling under the surface, sometimes rising to attention, but not frequently enough. And if we just paper them over again, it's only going to get worse and worse. That kind of rot can really destroy a foundation.
Yeah, I think that there are going to be some things that will stick with us in this return to, again, I don't like the phrase return to normal. I don't even like the phrase the new normal. It's whatever, you know, whatever our current circumstances are. But, you know, one of the mentions in the Guardian article was, you know, hybridity is here to stay. I think that's a good thing. I think that opera's been, you know, breaking its back, trying to figure out ways to expand itself into new audiences. Well, guess what? We have an internet, and we have magic screens that are on the eyeballs of basically everybody on this planet. There's your audience.
To keep talking about the present moment a little bit more, Oliver, who are some of those people that are missing out the most right now? And
well,
will likely
I just want to touch upon hybridity for a moment. I mean, we spoke to Barbara Hannigan a few weeks ago, and she said that streaming is here to stay. And she talks about a model of concert series where you know that at least one performance is going to be streamed. And how do those things work with the audience in the building? Because it is our nature as performers to want to play to the people that are in front of us and not to play to the camera.
Right.
So maybe it's the idea of doing a concert series of 3 performances, but one is just the camera and the other 2 are for people. I think streaming does give us an opportunity to spread our art further than it can when it's just ticketed performances and audiences and butts and seats. But do we really like these performances? Have we seen yet their full potential? I know a lot of companies are trying to, bring on creators who are good at this medium, like James Dara, just to say his name at least once a week,
Our contractual obligation.
But there's a lot of this chamber stuff happening where it's just like very small forces, piano accompaniment, string quartet accompaniment, 2 singers. And do we like this? Will we pay money to see and listen to those works when we think of opera as this spectacle, as something that's grand with chorus and orchestra and changing sets and, Deus Ex Machina and,
I would also, I would also
ESPN hit it right some years ago when ESPN managed to create a channel where you, the viewer, could pick which camera angle you wanted to watch the game on. And so you could go from the sidelines to the end zone to the 50-yard line to whatever you wanted. Until we get to that point in opera. You knew I was going to say this, right? A sports talk radio show that, of course, talks about opera. That's who we are, right? Until we get to that point in the opera house when I can pick which of the 6 angles I want to watch my opera production from. And I'm deadly serious about this. We have the technology. How are we going to put that into play?
And really, until live performance comes back in any sort of way, I don't think we can fully explore like what kind of different opportunities those media offer to us. It's like a cheeseburger and a veggie burger. The veggie burger can be really great. It can be a wonderfully satisfying meal. If it's trying to pretend to be a cheeseburger, though, it might not be as good as it could be itself, like on its own terms.
Weston, what were you about to say?
Well, along those lines, I was going to say that, one of the things I've been saying since the beginning of the pandemic, the few silver linings, I think, at the beginning was the notion that we have this new medium, essentially, this subgenre we can create. Because when you look at how music history has evolved with the introduction of technology, like recording cylinders and records and, streamed live television, you really see differences, not just in how you perceive older music, but in what you create with that. The introduction of the microphone, for example, changed how so many people sang in the sort of Western tradition for centuries, because all of a sudden you can sing much more quietly, much more expressively, but at the same time it comes with those limitations. You can't really hit the T's very hard. So a lot of early crooners won't use the letter T a lot. And I think that, we're in a position now with the internet where where a lot of people are encountering these technical problems and trying to solve them. And I think that those solutions could lead us to a whole new interesting subgenre within the operatic world. And I think it's a great excuse for opera companies to stop rejecting tradition and stop being afraid of, microphones. It's a knee-jerk reaction. I will say I'm pretty anti-microphone in most cases, but, things like that. I think that there's a really cool opportunity to create something actually new in addition to what already exists.
So to get back to the question, I just want to say that I don't have the patience to watch all of these things. And I know there's so much great content out there, so much, but it feels like a chore to me. What doesn't feel like a chore to me is going to the theater, because I know it's an experience. There's other people. It's, social. There is the vibrations you get from being in a space.
It's not possible though, but we can't do it.
I know, but I'm just saying that we haven't figured out how to make the virtual experience as satisfying yet. And maybe, if the pandemic continued for longer, we would have to, and we would learn to love this medium, but we're in this weird place right now where, you know, things are coming back, and some companies never really embraced the idea of going virtual and still try to do performances in tents and stuff like that. And so it's just interesting to see how this next year is going to pan out, and which companies are going to, you know, give audiences new experiences, and which ones are just going to rely on old tricks, and which ones are going to incorporate some of this new technology and do, you know, what was the word you used, Ashlee? Bilateral, hybridity. But another important aspect of this article, I'm sorry to cut you off, Matt, and we'll get right back to you, was just we're losing artists left and right.
Yeah, we are.
There are so many people who did not work at all last year. I mean, only the big names got to do, you know, whatever rare terror from their apartment, while so many other people who are just emerging as artists lost so many opportunities. And I just see so many of my freelance friends just quitting the business and starting new careers, and, you know, maybe thinking in the back of the head, yeah, I will sing if some opportunity comes, but I've already got this job now. And do I risk leaving this job, which is giving me stability, to go back to that career, which was so hard, you know? And we're all realizing how hard it was and how exhausting traveling was, and being away from our families was, you know. Maybe some people
and the lack of money
can't wait to go back to getting away from their family. Okay, go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry to cut you off. Matt, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You were about to say something, and then I okay.
You were about to say something like 5 minutes ago, and then Oliver just like totally steamrolled you.
I was going to say that I think that as this field continues to develop, we will see that these kinds of things become complements more than substitutes, so that they can both optimize in their own kind of way. But the fact of the matter is, like, the field is it's kind of in a shambles in terms of who is leading it, where it's being taken. And what I really want everyone listening and everyone on this call to be aware of is the ways that producers will try to lead these transformations, because they will not necessarily have the best interests of the artist, the best interests of the audience, the best interests of the art form itself in mind. We've seen throughout the pandemic, like, this humongous consolidation in terms of these technological giants like Amazon. And I'm worried that we might see something similar in the theaters. Like, it's a bad sign to me that the London Phantom of the Opera has cut their orchestra in half.
Yep.
They will be asking for what they call temporary solutions to problems, but it could really easily be a power grab that only furthers that kind of marginalization of the people who have always been the most vulnerable in the field.
And this is exactly the fight going on at the Met, right? You know, just not so much the agreement itself, but just like the knowledge that the Met can set these kinds of precedents if they don't fight it tooth and nail.
I mean, I'm of two minds about it, because there are these great archives that exist already, of recorded legacies, right, and there are so many contracts that have to be broken or new contracts to be drawn up just to share this material. And I sometimes think, I mean, I'm not a union buster or anything like that, but I sometimes think that there are these major orchestras, because it's usually the orchestras, it's not the singers, who are, you know, who have achieved so much. And I know that it takes so much to get into that level of orchestra, but have gotten there, and they have these contracts that put a lock on some of this stuff that's this material that's out there that we could enjoy, you know. And if we're going to go forward with hybrid models, we need to start rewriting contracts to say that, you know what, we need to be able to share this. It's otherwise, you know.
And the opera industry is facing this right now, but this is like really not that dissimilar from what happened with the Writers Guild strike back in, when was that, 2007? Like, the world of digital the digital wars have finally made it to opera. And
12 years later!
We as singers and musicians and directors cannot just let the sheer supply of labor out there undercut our value as the makers of the art itself.
Ashlee, as we were looking to the future, you said to me, we got to get used to this life. What life do we have to get used to?
A life where some brand new disease that we know nothing about could possibly forever alter our way of life. We've talked a lot about how this is, or many people have classified this as like a once in a lifetime pandemic. You know, we have the Spanish flu of 100 years ago, and then this one happened just now. And so our muscle memory wants to kick in, and, you know, we notice a pattern and say, well, we won't have another one of these for another 100 years. No, that is not the case. Every piece of data that we have points to how quickly things mutate, how many different strains are already offshooting of what we've seen. We don't have enough historical data to know how long vaccines are going to be good for. That's not even to mention all the other things that are, you know, growing and swimming and breeding around out there that may turn into some other disease. So the notion of this once in a life pandemic, it's not going to be the case. We're going to be dealing with, mark my words, sometime in the next decade, another disease that has the possibility and propensity to take over our way of life and amend what was going to be our new normal.
Team, as we wrap up this segment, I want to hear from you about the responsibilities of artists, administrators, donors, and audiences going forward. As you think about that, here's what I don't understand about the future. I don't understand why in this country, big not-for-profit opera houses are looking to other big not-for-profit opera houses to see what to do. Why apples are looking to apples, right? Here's where we should be looking. We should be looking at where the money is. We should be looking at Hollywood. We should be looking at Broadway. And yes, we should be looking at professional sports to tell us when to go back, how to do it. Because why? Because that's where the money is. Because there's no money at the big, even in the big house, not-for-profit opera world. The budgets are a fraction of what Broadway, Hollywood, and pro sports are raking in. That is where the star to follow is. As we wrap it up, who has a responsibility for an artist, administrator, audience member that they want to put out there?
Well, I think that, you know, working not necessarily in opera, aside from this podcast, as I do, I know a lot of, you know, straight theater people and other artists, and I don't know a single artist who hasn't had like some sort of reckoning over the past year with, you know, the inequity of, you know, the racial disparities within the field of theater and music, or, you know, the fact that they're like, oh God, I made more on unemployment, than I did, you know, working backbreaking labor, doing, you know, singing or performing, you know, 40 hours a week. And, was this really what I wanted to do? You know, and I want fellow artists to sort of be on the lookout for, as things go back to normal, whatever that is. I'd be really interested to see how much of that sort of newfound realization about how broken things were, and really sort of hang on to that and don't let it fall back to that again. Because I get that many people will be relieved to go back, but I don't want that relief to surpass the justice aspect of it.
Matt Cummings, what is your piece of advice for the future?
I think that's right on for everyone in the industry, but it really does apply to audiences too. Audiences and donors have a humongous responsibility to continue pushing forward and reforming what it is that this field can be. And even though we're talking about opera and the arts right now, what happens here is not limited to nonprofits. It's not limited to the arts. This is a question of economics. People, you know, that tourism is hugely driven by the arts. And people's livelihoods depend on this, not just the ones who are getting up on stage or who are in the wings or who are writing the pieces that people are going to be hopefully mounting. And it can't become so expensive that only the very richest can afford it in some kind of a death spiral, because that will only make this get worse and worse, faster and faster.
Ashlee, Hardgrave, give me that piece of advice for the future.
Well, I actually have two. These are the two phrases that I like to live by, and I think they are appropriate here. Number one, so what? Why are we doing this? What is the so what? Why are we even doing this in the first place? If the answer to this question is, this is the way it's always been done, no, kill it. It's dead. We need to think about why we're doing this in the first place. Why are we making this art? Why do we love this art? Why are we working and busting our asses trying to create this art? There has to be a way to maintain performance practices and institutional memory that make this art form great, but there's also got to be a way to still have room for innovation. We've seen, sort of the germinations of the seeds over the last 14 months or so, but that has to keep going. So thinking about the so what. Number 2, and this is a cardinal rule for life. Weston, I'm going to do my best not to curse so that you don't have to edit this or bleep this out later.
Okay.
Don't be an a-hole. No matter who you are in this industry, don't be an a-hole. If you're somebody who's in a position of power, if you're somebody who's an audience member, if you're a critic, if you're someone who is shaping the next generation of musicians, don't be an a-hole. This year has been too hard. It's been too hard for everyone. We don't need to be having a competition over who can be the biggest a-hole. And frankly, all of the problems that we've been yammering on about for the last 14 months or so on this show have to deal with people who got too big for their britches and were straight up a-holes. Now is not the time. If we're going to make it alive out of this, literally and figuratively and metaphorically, with this art form we love, we need to remember that this art needs soul and that we need to have one too.
Oliver Camacho, what is on your mind for the future?
Well, I just want to dovetail on what Matt and Weston and Ashlee also said, and just say it my way. Gatekeepers, whoever you are, whatever level you're at, stop saying that, if only this person had enough passion, they would, be successful in this business. No, we now realize that you can have all the passion in the world, but you need the financial ability to do it. You need the resources. You need people who are looking out for you and actively trying to bring you up in this business. You need mentors, and you need people who are, leaders who are trying to make the space diverse. Otherwise, we're going to just go to having all rich kids in this business again, all rich white kids, and it will get boring, and then it will really die. And just to wrap this up, next week, we're going to actually look at some season announcements, which are already coming out. And I'm so curious to really investigate these things and make some, bets and predictions on which companies are trying to go with hybrid, which companies are just got their tail between their legs and just doing Barbara Seville. As much as I love Barbara Seville, and, who's getting cast and who's doing stuff with piano and string quartets.
That's going to be on the show next week. We'll play some Moneyball, make some predictions, and of course, put our money where our collective mouths are. Talk a little sports before we get into the 2-minute drill. Medina Spirit update. I thought Medina Spirit was kind of one and done.
He kind of is now. Also, quick correction. I pronounced it Medina last weekend. Apologies to the horse, not to the trainer. But I pronounced.
Shame.
I know. I have a friend who lives in Medina, Ohio, and that's just where my brain goes. So apologies to the horse.
We all love Ohio, Ashlee. But
if I had $1 for every time
Ohio is canceled.
About how much I love Ohio. No, no Triple Crown winner for our buddy Medina Spirit, because they finished. No, the horse is male. He finished third. Bob Baffert, who was the trainer, however, has been banned from entering Medina or any other horse at Belmont Park. So nobody's going to be able to do anything like they did before with the Belmont Stakes. No word from the horse on whether he was complicit in the original doping.
I think he might say nay.
Bob Baffert, Bob Baffert reminds me of Andy Warhol, like on a bad day.
Did you happen to see Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live this weekend? It was Beck Bennett did a turn as Bob Baffert, and it was a highlight. It was a good time.
Say that 5 times fast.
Defensive back Wontarius Bryant, he was hoaxed over the weekend. The Atlanta Falcons allegedly were texting with him to say, yeah, we want you to come and do like a workout for us so we can kind of scope you out and possibly, sign you to the team, whatever. And he went to Atlanta and showed up at the appointed time. And the whole thing was a joke by some guy who got Bryant's number and impersonated like an Atlanta Falcons defensive coach. And the whole thing was a ruse.
What did I just say about being an a-hole? Don't be an a-hole. That is an a-hole move.
Go back and look at we'll put this on the website as well, operaboxscore.com. Go back and look at Bryant's Twitter feed. He takes the absolute pure class, high moral ground in responding to this. 2-minute drill. It's right now.
This just in. the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up, y'all. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
The Metropolitan Opera struck a deal with one of its unions last week. The American Guild of Musical Artists, representing chorus members, soloists, dancers, actors, directors, and stage managers, has not disclosed the terms of the agreement. Details will be released after the union's vote to ratify the contract next week.
But that's far from the end of the Met's ongoing labor disputes. Days after the AGMA agreement was announced, members of the orchestra and IATSE gathered to protest the company's handling of other union negotiations. The Met asked for things that would set us back 20 years, American Federation of Musicians chapter president Adam Krauthammer said at the rally. The only person who doesn't see that his job is to reopen the arts is Peter Gelb.
And the winners of the Metropolitan Opera Eric and Dominique Lafont competition, known until last week as the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions, are tenor Duke Kim, soprano Hyo-young Kim, soprano Ravik McMillan, mezzo-soprano Emily Sierra, and mezzo-soprano Emily Triegel. Congratulations to all the finalists, especially friend of the Weston, Emily Sierra.
Last week, friend of the show, Barbara Hannigan, was the 8th singer and 16th conductor to win the Leonie Sonig Music Prize. Hannigan received the award on stage in Copenhagen, after performing Strauss's Metamorphoses and Poulenc's La Voix Humaine. Hannigan announced that she would be donating the financial part of the award to Equilibrium Young Artists and Momentum, initiatives which support young professional musicians in the first substantial phase of their careers.
In trade news, Christian Thielemann is no longer the music director of the Bayreuth Festival. His contract was technically over on January 1st of this year, and plans to retain Thielemann or any Bayreuth music director have not been announced. The news comes soon after Semperoper Dresden announced that their contract with Thielemann would also not be renewed.
This week's Yellow Cards.
Spain. Barcelona's Gran Teatre del Liceu announced that it will be able to expand to 70% audience capacity starting May 24th.
Switzerland. Zurich Opera is set to move ahead with a Lucia de Lammermoor in June, with a cast updated to include Irina Lungu in the title role.
USA. Portland Opera will return to live performance June 22nd through 27th with a 90-minute version of Frida, starring friend of the Ashlee, Catalina Cuervo.
This week's Red Cards.
Finland. The Savonlinna Opera Festival has canceled its entire 2021 season.
Germany. The Berlin Philharmonic has canceled the production of Tchaikovsky's Mazeppa. Vladislav Sulimsky was slated to sing the title role but was unable to travel to Berlin due to a COVID-19 diagnosis.
Switzerland. Again. Grand Theatre Geneva has cancelled a La Traviata with Ekaterina Bakanova slated for June and July.
Exit stage right. British soprano Pauline Tinsley has died at the age of 93. In the 1960s, she was a regular on the stages of Welsh National Opera, English National Opera, and the Royal Opera House. Tinsley's wide repertoire ranged from the Queen of the Night to Elektra.
Pianist, vocal coach, and the author of Do Sing in Russian, Gennady Mersин has died after a long and difficult journey with cancer. In addition to preparing singers for a variety of work across Philadelphia, Mersин also founded Philly's Russian Opera Workshop and PrivateLessons.com.
And on this day, May 17th, in 1779, it was the first performance of Gluck's opera Iphigénie en Tauride in Paris. Spanish baritone and teacher Manuel Garcia Jr. was born this day in Madrid in 1805. In 1823, it was the birth of contralto and composer Charlotte Helen Sainton Dolby. 1884 saw the first performance by Australian soprano Nellie Melba in her hometown of Melbourne. And then in 1890, it was the first performance of Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana in Rome. 1906 saw the birth of Croatian soprano Zinka Milanov in Zagreb, joined 12 years later by fellow legend, Swedish soprano Birgit Nilsson in 1918. In 1924 was the birth of French baritone Gabriel Bacquier. In 1978, Philips Electronics announced their new digital sound reproduction system from a flat silver compact disc. And finally, one for Weston in 1990, it was the first performance of Eino Juhani Rautavaara's Vincent at Finnish National Opera.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
I wonder if any of you are by any chance familiar with the 2006 sitcom classic, Everybody Hates Chris.
Only from the ads on the side of buses.
Yeah, me too. No one's ever seen it. But I could not help but remember those ads. They came rushing back to me in a flash because everybody hates Christian Thielemann Keep
What did
firing
he do?
What did he do? Literally,
He apparently he got fired from Dresden partially because he got into arguments with the director frequently, like apparently really nasty ones. I don't know exactly what the nature of those arguments were. And also
he's pretty notoriously like very conservative in terms of repertoire he wants to do, and in terms of like how he wants to conduct them. Not much one for changing things once they've been established, so does not pass Ashlee's test for being a musician in 2021.
I mean, it's basically the exact plot of the classic 2006 sitcom Everybody Hates Chris, so you can always look up that if you want to know exactly what's going on in Dresden. And
Also
Detroit.
starring Terry Crews.
Oliver, the Met auditions now have like a marginally shorter name.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Well, in a way, I mean, how are we going to shorthand this? The what are the Lafront?
Are you a Lafonter?
Yeah. So I guess I assume these are major donors, Eric and Dominique Lafont,
The Doms,
have now been what do you call this when you work in development?
Endowed.
And no,
I
like
guess.
when
No, they're probably not dead.
Like
No,
naming rights. It's like stadium naming rights.
It's naming rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but there's a term that Devo people use for like, you know, a type of premium or like benefit of like giving so much money. Oh, you can name the bathroom, you know? It's the, you know, George and Oliver upper box score commemorative toilet seat.
B-Day.
You know? So,
I do not think that they're going to be naming anything after us at the Met.
You don't know that. You don't.
Actually, if we get named for anything at the Met, it's going to be the toilet. You know, it is.
Well, I want to be the. So Tanner Duke Kim,
I'm just not ready.
Hyo Young Kim, are two Koreans who won. I think 2 out of 5 were competing, who were the final 5 finalists. Also, we talked about soprano Raven McMillan and your friend Emily Sierra and Emily Triegel.
Not one, but 2 Emilys.
It's a good day for Koreans and Emilys. Sorry, Raven.
Also,
But
it's a good day for her
Raven.
too.
Yeah, it's a good day for her too. But I was messaging Duke Kim on Facebook. He doesn't know who I am, but I was like, I know you're gonna win. Be our guest on the show. And he only got back to me like today. So I'm gonna try to get him on so we could talk to him about what it's like to be in phase 2 of Koreans taking over the opera world ever since Sumi Jo was
just
snubbed.
wringing her hands in a fabulous ball gown in the corner, being like, soon.
Yes. But you know what I was thinking is like how amazing Sumi Jo is. I want to see the Sumi Jo BTS collaboration. Wouldn't that be awesome?
She'll do it.
Yes.
You know she'll do it.
would.
I mostly just want her to cover Dynamite, but that works too.
Both are good.
See, okay, we got to get back to this renaming thing for a second here.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So, first of all, the name Lafont, like it's a mouthful, but you know, you can get there. So the Lafont's like, I've been doing a little bit of homework on these guys because I'm like, who are they? Because if you get a chance to name the young artist competition, like that's substantial. So, okay, what I have learned about Eric Lafont is that he cannot finish filling out a LinkedIn profile because there's about 3 on here and they're all semi-retired and one of them is in French. So I don't really know is this person
Oh, he's
French?
Lafont.
Does he live in Wyoming?
It actually looks like he did pass away, but she is still alive.
Redacted. Will not speak ill of people that I will not complain about an empty LinkedIn profile. Can we cut all this Weston sleep slowly away? Oh my god. I just yelled at a deceased person for a technicality. I'm a monster.
In fairness, it's a long name change for something that, you know, was okay, had been that way since the 50s, you know.
Yeah.
It's, you know, and it's funny. I was looking for, because there's like a Lafont Family Foundation, and you know their assets are out there. You can take a look, and from a number standpoint, I think the most recent documents you can get are from like 2018 on a lot of the fundraising websites. It doesn't seem as if it's substantial enough to fund this sort of a program, so they must have done very well for themselves in the last few years to be able to grab a hold of that.
And not just rename it, but rename it, like they announced the renaming like as like the winners were announced.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You've already typed up your resume with the Met Council auditions, and you got to change it. And like the formatting is off. You have to redo the margins. It's a whole thing.
And if it's in Google Docs, then you got to hope to goodness that wherever you're going has a computer that'll turn it into a PDF. The whole thing.
Apparently, Dominique Lafont spent many hours volunteering with the auditions over the last 20 years.
Oh,
that's nice.
So sweet.
Yeah.
I love that.
Probably best not to approach them for an interview at this particular juncture. Ashlee, is there anything rude you'd like to say about Barbara Hannigan?
No, because I love Miss Hannigan. She's amazing. We absolutely... Okay, help me get this right. So she got this award on stage in Copenhagen after performing both the Strauss piece and the Poulenc. If I'm getting this wrong, please correct me. She conducted the Strauss, and then she conducted and sang the Poulenc.
That is correct.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
She is a cyborg. How is this? Yeah. She's incredible.
And they're both difficult. They're both difficult pieces
So
from
hard.
a conducting and singing standpoint.
I mean, if we didn't love her enough, I mean, man, this sealed the deal.
Absolutely extraordinary.
And she was on Upper Box Score, everybody.
Oh, yes, that was her. We basically bumped her over the edge.
I know you just subscribed to the podcast to hear this episode, which is going to be called Everybody Hates Peter, I think. And you just go back a couple episodes to hear that great interview with Barbara Hannigan. So,
you know, I was going to say something sassy about the OBS bump, but since I've already stepped in it at least once on this broadcast, I'm going to let you guys take the sass from now on.
I mean, I'm thrilled that like the Met and AGMA have been able to come to some sort of resolution. I'm a member of AGMA, full disclosure. And, like, this is the first I'm hearing of this. I'm not quite sure why they haven't been sort of like telling its members like how thrilled they are that they've finally made this pact. Long way to go. I mean, IATSE, that's going to be a different ball of wax to do that deal. Matt.
I mean, just like the fact that the details aren't being released until they have the vote to ratify it, to me says that they're aware that this might be a little bit of a precarious situation, and they are crossing every finger and every toe and getting it over the finish line before doing a victory lap.
Keep an eye on it, as we always do. Let's wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call. On Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. To take you home, wherever you are, however you're listening, Oliver Camacho.
Lyric Opera's Rhine Opera Center is making good on its promise to add 2 more members to the Rhine Opera Center, including, just announced today, I believe, pianist Donald Lee III as one of the conductor pianist track people. He's African American, and you could tell from his CV that he emphasizes Black composers in his repertoire. So they did a good one. So congratulations, Donald Lee III, and also added to the cast of the Rhine Opera Center was bass Rivers Hawkins. Can't wait to hear you.
Matt Cummings.
In preparation for theaters reopening in the near future, fingers crossed, the LA Times ran an op-ed from their theater critic Charles McNulty asking for everyone to just get rid of intermissions because they're inconvenient and silly and difficult for theater. And this is just so fundamentally not my experience, where intermissions give you a chance to like soak in what you've just experienced and pivot. They have a dramatic purpose of being an act break. And this here on Opera Box Score is an intermission Stan account, and I feel strongly about this.
Clearly, someone has never sat through Parsifal. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Hashtag keep the mish.
That article made absolutely no sense. Weston Williams not even on the show next week. He's clearly already left the building.
Goodbye, everyone.
Ashlee Hardgrave.
A little television recommendation for you, music television recommendation. If you have access to Peacock or know somebody that has access to an account, I highly, highly recommend the series Girls 5 Eva. If you were ever a fan of 30 Rock and you're missing it and you want that quickness and that formula, think about that, but a series about a girl group, pop group from the late 90s who 20-ish years later, their song gets sampled. They decide they're going to rekindle their love of music and their love of performing as 40-something-year-old women. Girls 5 Eva on Peacock. It is a delight.
Also, if you have access to Peacock and you'd be willing to share your login credentials with me, I could then watch the English Premier League all day Saturday and all day Sunday for free. That's
George,
it
I have
for
a
this
coupon
week's-
from Jewel. I'll hit you up.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That'll work. All right, that's all we got for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer's Norm Woodel. He's at normwoodel.com. On Facebook, search for Opera Box Score. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Opera Box Score. Help us deepen our bench of listeners by liking and sharing our social media posts. Email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Subscribe to the podcast on Stitcher. Just favorite the show on Apple Podcasts. The views and opinions expressed on Opera Box Score are solely those of the show's creative team. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of the accounts of this show without the express written consent of Opera Box Score is actually fine, okay? And just leave me alone. Let me live my life, Dad. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashlee Hardgrave, I'm George Cederquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you rename your prestigious vocal competition. We're back with an all-new show next week when we give you our picks, our predictions for the recent flurry of 2021-22 season announcements. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, more bench-clearing brawls. Join us.